I now have the pleasure of introducing Nora Butler-Burke, who will introduce tonight's subject. Nora has been involved in migrant justice, prison abolition, feminist and anti-colonial movements for over a decade. She spent the past 6 years working at Action Santé Travestis et Transsexuelle du Québec, ASTTE, a Montreal harm reduction project working with low-income and sex-working trans women and men. She is currently working on documenting the impacts of double punishment and state surveillance on the lives of migrant trans women in Montreal. So Nora, if you can please join me.
Thanks for having me here. It's a real pleasure to get to be part of this evening and to watch this incredibly important movie and to engage in conversation afterwards. I'm really looking forward to it. So I will keep this quite brief. Zoe Mavroudi's documentary, Ruins, allows us to bear witness to the HIV witch-hunt that the Greek Ministry of Health unleashed in April 2012. In the lead up to parliamentary elections, hundreds of women, predominantly injection drug users, some of them homeless, some migrants and sex workers, were arrested, submitted to HIV testing, generally against their consent. And of those arrested, to what I understand, 32 of these women who tested HIV positive were incarcerated. As we'll see in the movie, these women's names and pictures were disseminated in the mainstream media, used in a pre-election move to really shift public attention from widespread outrage against austerity measures and to instead draw attention to issues of public health and state security, and to really drum up a fear of migrant sex workers spreading disease to the general public. And it was in the words of the then Minister of Health that HIV had spread beyond the ghettos and entered Greek society, end quote, clearly marking these women as dangerous and infectious outsiders. The film's examination of the impact of HIV criminalization on the women who were arrested and their families and on the response of community organizers, I think really offers a crucial counterpoint to the vicious campaign that was led by the Greek government, but also the media. The film encourages us to step outside of the role of spectator. Of course, we're here to watch the movie, but to also deepen our analysis of the ways in which oppressed and marginalized communities are further targeted, scapegoated, and attacked by the state in times of austerity. So in watching this, I was thinking of examples here in Canada, in Quebec also, where we can perhaps see some commonalities in the way that this happens. And while the context is different, we're obviously living in a time of rampant neoliberalism and austerity, marked by deep cuts to essential services, an increasing concentration of wealth and power in the hands of very few, and a dominant right-wing ideology rooted in, among other things, settler colonialism and, I would say, fascism, and mobilized through fear and calls to nationalism. And much as in Greece, the blatant targeting of those already on the margins, including sex workers, drug users, migrants, and HIV-positive people, is self-evident. In recent years, you may be familiar that Canada has established itself as a world leader in the criminalization of HIV non-disclosure, resulting in highly mediatized prosecution and incarceration of several people living with HIV. The collaboration of public health and the criminal justice system has set a very dangerous precedent, reinforcing HIV stigma and oppression. As in Greece, this has occurred against a backdrop of wide-reaching cutbacks to harm reduction and HIV-related services within marginalized communities, at the same time as increasing funding for prison expansion, for border control, and general means of state surveillance. In Quebec, we can see similar attacks happening on migrant and racialized women. The recent Parti Québécois government's Charter of Values is a clear effort to drum up racist hysteria in the guise of protecting Quebec's national identity, resulting in a multiplication of institutional and interpersonal violence against racialized and migrant communities. In a similar vein, I don't know if you saw this in the news just recently, last week, There was an arrest of a leader of a so-called human trafficking ring here in Montreal by the RCMP under a project called Project Combative, which is a state program claiming to target Romanian organized crime and to save Romanian women from abuse and sexual exploitation. And you might know that over the past few years, Canada has placed very severe restrictions on migration of Roma people from Romania. And again, as in Greece, I think that this is an example of where the media has quickly regurgitated a very demonizing and dehumanizing language, legitimizing state violence against migrant women who engage in underground economies, including human smuggling and sex work. And I think we could go on and on with different kinds of examples to understand the ways in which the state seeks out already marginalized communities, attacks them, and relies on the media to really amplify these stories in very sensationalist ways to draw attention away from a structure that is crumbling. And I think that this movie is brilliant in the way that it shares that with us, but also in the ways that it puts at the forefront the women and their families who were directly impacted by this issue. And it's important to think about and hopefully hear more about the ways that this is continuing to happen in Greece and to make links to what is happening here in Quebec and in Canada. So briefly, I'm just gonna present Zoe. Zoe Mavroudi is the film's director. She is a native Greek actress, playwright, and screenwriter, currently based in London. She graduated from the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York, where she studied on a Fulbright scholarship. Her screenplays have won numerous awards and honorable mentions in festivals and competitions internationally. So I just want to thank Zoe for chronicling and amplifying the experiences of women targeted in this HIV witch hunt, and to thank you for sharing your work with us here tonight. And thank you all for coming out.
Δόθηκαν πριν από λίγο στη δημοσιότητα οι φωτογραφίες της 20χρονης Ρωσίδας, η οποία εκδιδόταν σε παράνομο οίκο ανοχής στην Αχαρνών και πάσχει από AIDS.
Εντοπίστηκαν σήμερα ακόμη 3 ιερόδουλες θετικές στον ιό του AIDS.
Τίποτα, έχει τον ιό του AIDS. Αυτό δεν μου είπαν τίποτα άλλο.
Δεν είχε κάνει έγκλημα το παιδί μου. Έγκλημα δεν έκανε. Στο site της ελληνικής αστυνομίας υπήρχαν φωτογραφίες αμφάς, προφίλ, ολόσωμες, ονοματεπώνυμα.
Πρώτη φορά είδαμε ουσιαστικά να ποινικοποιείται η οροθετικότητα και ανθρώπινα ερείπια να βγαίνουν με αυτόν τον τρόπο στις τηλεοράσεις.
Just wanted to say that this documentary has been supported by independent media organizations, so Follow Magazine, Omnia TV, are independent voices in Greek journalism, and we also got funding from the UK, not from Greece, from an organization called Union Solidarity International, which is a great organization that supports solidarity around the world in unions and labor organizations, and from Unite the Union, the labor union in the UK. But yeah, to your question, I made this documentary because I was very angry and frustrated about a number of things. One of them was how the Greek crisis, or what was happening in my country since the crisis, the financial crisis first hit in 2009, was being portrayed internationally, and especially in our media in our country. And I found that there were some let's say, very evident signs of, I don't know if the term fascistization exists, but of the Greek society becoming more and more extreme. Earlier, Nora said that some of these tactics that were used in this case were racist, and I would say fascist. Well, I would definitely say that we shouldn't be hesitant to use this term anymore when we're talking about what's happening in Greece and in other parts of Europe. It is fascism. I mean, this is the best word to describe it. There is a precedent. We've seen this happen before, and that's what's happening now. We have targeting of vulnerable groups, we have social cleansing, and we have a very distinct language that is used in our media and has been used and had been used before these arrests by representatives of the center-right and center-left and socialist parties. So the ministers that you saw earlier, most of them were actually socialist ministers that belonged to the Pan-Hellenic socialist movement. So I will give you a little bit of the context of those days when this happened. It was a few days before the general election, the first round of general elections that were the most critical general elections, we were told, since the end of the Greek junta in 1974, that we've had for the past 40 years of modern democracy in Greece. So we had these elections where basically there was a clear dilemma there, which was, if you don't vote for the pro-austerity political forces, then Greece will just simply exit the Eurozone. How that would happen, we didn't know. Nobody could explain clearly, but it was clear that there will be a rift. If you do not comply with the dictates and the rules of the troika, the lenders of your country, you are going to exit the Eurozone, then you will become marginalized, and you will become the pariahs of Europe, and you will not be able to have any of the basic goods that are needed to run a society, oil and medication, all this kind of stuff. And so the outcome of the election is that the pro-austerity forces have won. They created a coalition government in the second round of elections in June. But in those first elections, 5 days after these arrests, we had the first big sort of entrance of a neo-Nazi party in Greek parliament, the Golden Dawn. You may have heard this referred to as a far-right party, but they're not far-right, they're neo-Nazis. They have existed for a long time. They used to be very marginal. They published journals with these paintings of Hitler, and so they were clearly neo-Nazis, but they in order to be elected, they assumed a kind of more serious profile in the media. And so a few days after this, the neo-Nazis were elected, and they became the third, and they still are officially the third largest party in Greece. So I wanted to show this film. So it was a big turning point, that election. And in my opinion, this case was also a turning point, and it showed me. I was watching it as an observer, just turned on my TV and saw this unfold. I saw this as the point where it became obvious that in order to win the election, in order to continue austerity, in order to do these things, this political class would do anything. Nothing was off the what's the expression? Nothing was forbidden, and so that scared me very much, made me very angry, and I just wanted to capture that moment and the way it played out. It was a clear threat to anyone watching, I think. Even though the rhetoric is that some of you are obviously normal and family people, and you're not gay, and you don't take drugs, so you are good, and we support you. I think that the underlying sort of threat was a threat to everyone. The difference is no longer accepted. Weakness is no longer accepted. We want full consent and compliance. We want full, submission to this. And we are prepared to do anything in order to make that, to impose our policies. And I also saw this as it was a big turning point in terms of policing in Greece. A few months after this, we had Xenios Zeus, which is an operation named after the father of the gods and the Olympian the Olympian gods in Greek mythology. So he was the god of the father of the gods and the god of hospitality. So it's basically a policing, a run amok. There was a huge operation started in August. 2 of the women, in fact, in this case, were arrested in August of 2012, where thousands of people were seemed to have been tested for HIV. 10 were diagnosed HIV positive, and 2 were women and were led to prison to join the others who had been there for a few months. And this operation was massive and targeted migrants, undocumented migrants, but it was a complete failure. And we have the reports that only 6% during the first months where they rounded up something like 85,000 people, only 6% were actually undocumented. And then in March 2013, we had another operation named after Thetis, the mother of Achilles in Greek mythology, where they actually rounded up drug users from central Athens again and led them to a detention camp outside of Athens, a real concentration camp in some way, and a sort of a modern version of that, and kept them there for unknown reasons. So we have excessive policing, interference in these areas where you should have outreach work and support as opposed to this kind of, aggression. And we've had very severe crackdown, crackdown's not the word, persecution of transsexual people in Thessaloniki, the second largest city of Greece in the north, where they're just being harassed and rounded up and taken to police stations for no good reason. And I think I should stop here and maybe pass it on to you, but just to summarize, yeah, it was a turning point in terms of policing, in terms of what the system was capable of doing. That was how I interpreted it, and that's what I wanted to capture, this feeling of things now have gone incredibly wrong, and the situation is very extreme, and the people in charge are prepared to do anything to continue to maintain their power and their place in government. No. Yes, I was in Greece in September. We premiered the film in Athens and Thessaloniki, and we've been showing it around Greece. Greece is still officially a democracy, so we have, things have changed, but you don't have situations where, we have seen journalists being put in positions, being kind of persecuted in some way and taken to court for just doing their jobs, etc. But we don't have extreme situations where we have a complete overturn of democracy. However, and there has been no reaction from the official, those involved. We tried to interview people from Chronicle, the Center for Disease Control, as well as 2 of the ministers that you saw in the documentary, and they didn't respond, or at first showed some kind of response, but then withdrew it later. So this was from some people in Chronicle, inside Chronicle, who were in charge of outreach programs to drug users. But the response from people and from a big part of the press has been very positive. So the ones who disagreed just ignored us, but we didn't actually have any reason for real concern. I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah, thank you for this question. I should say, first of all, that prostitution is sex work is a legal activity in Greece. So that means that if you get tested, I believe twice a month, you have a health booklet that you have to present to authorities. You are legally allowed to do that. to work in the sex industry. And in the late 90s, there was a new law that put down into writing the conditions under which brothels in urban areas should the conditions under which brothels would be could be legal. But the thing is that not a lot of that has been implemented because Athens is such a crowded city, so it's so congested that, for example, a condition that a brothel should be this far away from any public building or school cannot really be, put into practice because, it's just impossible. Because of the layout of the city. But just to the point of your, the crux of your question, my understanding is that there is no real polemic, between decriminalization and feminists who are against prostitution, who want sex work to be made illegal. I attribute that to the fact that there is no real, there is not enough, is my understanding, a strong feminist movement overall, unfortunately. But in this case, I personally do not equate the fear-mongering and the persecution of sex workers that is coming from the state and from the representatives of the state with that of feminists who want sex work to be criminalized. So, for example, the women who were on the Solidarity Initiative, who supported the women here as soon as they were imprisoned and stood by them, they're against, sex work, and they believe that it's equal to rape, etc. So, the point that I tried to make in the film was that, first of all, to allow the women to present their case and to express themselves freely. And for these women, it was they felt stigmatized by that charge much more than they were by the felony charge, because of the social conditions, because of their background, because of where they're from, their families, etc. So that's something that you should acknowledge when you make a film, and just put the polemics aside for a minute, just to let the person speak. And my personal opinion is that that's something that's really missing as well, because sometimes you could just get lost in whatever your opinion is about the way this issue should be handled. And but just so that there's no misunderstanding, I don't think that there's anybody in Greece who would support mandatory HIV tests for sex workers anyway, regardless of what they think, about the issue, where they stand on the issue. But no, I don't think there is, and that's one of the things that came up during the documentary. I just felt that there was a lot of reaction coming from HIV NGOs and feminists and people from just doctors from who have been working in HIV wards, etc. But I didn't feel that there was a unified front against all of this. And I think it may have something to do with the fact that activism in Greece is kind of reflective of some of the other problems. It's kind of fragmented. I don't know if that's a problem in Canada, but it's kind of fragmented. It's that we have, we're too concerned with our differences. And in my opinion, what's happening now in Greece is an opportunity to stop doing that, because things are so extreme that you should struggle. Now the struggle should be to find a common ground, find a common ground in all of this. I'm not sure, if it's the lack of polemics or the existence of polemics that is kind of it sort of impedes the progress and real resistance to all of this. No, at some point it was acknowledged sort of timidly that, well, they're drug users. They were not sex workers. But that did not really change the official narrative or inform the position of the journalists. I think it was a disgraceful stance through and through, I mean, from beginning to end. I didn't see really any reason to justify, or I didn't feel that there was anything, there was even one positive moment in all of this. I mean, the people who would have given a different opinion were either ignored or just allowed to voice an opinion for, maybe I saw a couple of interviews from HIV activists in all of this, and it would be on state channels, not the private channels. But no, it didn't change. And then when it was over, and when it was clear that there was a reaction, it started coming from abroad as well, from the United Nations, from organizations from around the world. Then it just stopped. But the women were already in the police stations that were going to be led to prison within the next couple of weeks, and they just stopped covering the case. And when the first 5 women were acquitted in January 2013, I believe there was just, I've heard of one report where they were just waiting for them outside the prison, again with cameras, and to try and interview them. But they just did not follow up with the story at all. It was over as soon as what you saw was over, essentially. But of course, it lives on because the photos are still published online. There's still websites that have the photos and the personal data. So there has been no attempt either to contain or to erase this, to pull back on this, or to punish anyone involved. So the official journalistic groups did not really call anybody on this. As it was not on the news anymore. It was over in the minds of everybody. Well, I think the interesting thing about this case for me is that it's about so many different things. I mean, one of them is obviously patriarchy, and you can find the source of a lot of things in those patriarchies being rooted into society. But it's also about, as I said earlier, social cleansing, the government and political class trying to take control of the center of Athens for reasons that extend beyond the fact that it's prime real estate, that there's a lot of interests involved there, but also because of its symbolic value. But for me, it's also an attempt. I mean, it goes much deeper than that. There's also the health. Before I go into what I was going to say, the fact that we have a dismantling of the health sector, the public health sector right now, and what really happened here was that the minister that you saw, Minister Loverdes, is one of the people who started the aggressive, dismantling of the public health sector, and it's because of mistakes like the ones he made, and of the social context and the context of the crisis of the high unemployment that we have these problems. So we had a spike in new HIV infections among drug users, and of course the reasons were, according to the European Center for Disease Control, which actually went to Greece a few weeks after the arrest, probably prompted by this craziness. They published a report in November 2012 and officially stated that this was because of unsafe injecting practices and wasn't because of migrants or all this, science fiction of the bad, enemy invading your country and bringing a virus with them. There was no data to support that migrants or sex workers were driving the epidemic. So it was very clear that it was happening in central Athens. It was because of there are very specific ways that you can deal with this kind of problem. And instead of dealing with it, they just allowed it to get even worse. So in 2012, we had even more new infections than in 2012. So, but going back to what you're saying, I think it goes deeper than just all these issues. I think that the people who are in power in Greece, just like every Greek now has an existential crisis, in a way because of the crisis, they also have an existential crisis, and I think they're wondering about what their role is, who they are. And I saw what they did here as, they obviously want to control the future, right? They want to decide what's going to happen tomorrow. But they understand, I think, instinctively or subconsciously that they also, in order to do that, to control the future, they need to control the past as well. And all the people in the streets, the people who started returning to these parts of Athens after the whole Olympic Games, the hullabaloo ended, and there was no more money to waste on the center of Athens, so these people started returning to the center, and I think they represent something. Their bodies, represent something. It's very important, and it must be. They're in some way they're the most representative citizens. They suffer, and we all suffer, but they suffer publicly, and that is a reminder of something that needs to be. It's essential for the political class and the ruling classes and the elites to not be visible. So they have to make them invisible. They have to get rid of them, because they are a part of history that is out there. Is public, and I feel that that's what they were trying to do here more than anything. They were trying to erase history, because they need to do that in order to continue on with what they're planning to do. So just some thoughts about I don't think you can explain any of this just by looking at statistics or looking at how obviously patriarchal and homophobic Greece is. All of that is true, or the lack of a feminist movement, etc. I think you have to go deeper into the motives and to understand how they're thinking, and it's kind of a natural reaction in a way, because they are in panic and they don't know what they're doing, and they do have an agenda that needs to be implemented. Otherwise, they will disappear, and they will not have their jobs and their positions. So it was kind of a reaction, what they did during those days, of people who are also in a state of panic, who realize that the power is slipping through their fingers, and they were just desperate to grab onto it and hold on to it. There was no precedent real precedent of this kind for HIV, for non-disclosure between partners, or any of what you have in Canada or in the U.S. and other European countries. What we had were a couple of cases. One was a man who did not disclose in a hospital application to donate blood that he had a homosexual contact. So then he ended up being HIV positive, and because he didn't disclose it, when he donated blood, he was actually prosecuted and convicted. I don't remember what sentence he got. And then we had a case of a man who actually only a few weeks ago, he took his case to the European courts, and he was given compensation against the Greek state. And he was a man who had been laid off because his colleagues actually didn't want to work with him when they found out that he was HIV positive. So the employer, so it was an employment issue over whether he had the right to keep his job, even though the employer judged that he was a liability to the company. But we didn't have any of we didn't have the problem that you have here and the very extensive prosecutions, and we didn't have laws. We didn't have your laws, or one law, major law from 2009, I believe. So I'm not sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. If you have a general law that, you could be prosecuted for reckless transmission, simply because it's sort of assumed that if you know that you have something, you are obligated to disclose, but without going into the specifics of whether condom use or viral load or any of those things. So to me, this case and the research that I did and what I've read on Canada and Canadian law and the prosecutions here sort of highlight the fundamental issue with HIV criminalization, which is it's just fundamentally unfair, and it doesn't. There's no common sense to it. So this is a very extreme case, but in some way it embodies a lot of the issues that I think come up in non-disclosure and reckless transmission cases. So you still have the idea that the virus is essentially a deadly weapon, and that sex is some kind is an act of aggression, equivalent to driving a car at somebody or hitting them. So I just cannot find anything in real life or in my idea of what consensual relationships are like, or even transactional sex and under certain circumstances that could justify that. And I don't see how a person in this position could possibly defend themselves. And I think, Canada obviously doesn't have the problems that Greece has, but who is to say that in the future, the law that pre-exists cannot be used, just like this health decree was actually used in this case to do something at this scale, at this level. I'm not an expert on what's happening in Canada, but I think it's really, really scary, and it's very, very, it's just profoundly. I think it's profoundly misogynistic. The idea that you have laws that target women more and minorities, and you don't question why that is happening. It's very scary. So you're definitely not Greece, but I did see a lot of common, issues raised when I started reading on the Canadian laws and the issue here.